This is the Power Break Podcast number 302, titled, Are You Guarding Your Heart? Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Brubaker, along with JT, as we hope you'll stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life.
This, the Power Break Podcast, with a focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical aspects, all to help you succeed in the race of life. For show notes from today's podcast, go to bobbrubaker.com and follow the link for the Power Break Podcast. Bob, what say you, my friend?
Things are good. I've had a couple of treatments on my immune system, and I'm feeling good. So I don't know what to say, but I'm very thankful.
Yeah, I'm very thankful too, man. You had me scared for a little bit there, but as always, look what God can do for you, man.
Yeah, we are very thankful. Well, JT, speaking of thankful, let's thank our listeners for tuning into the podcast, for telling others about the podcast, and for leaving those ratings and reviews wherever you download the podcast. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, it's so, my kudos this week is to all of our listeners. Just because there's so many consistent listeners now to the podcast that, I just feel like we have a pretty big extended family right now, and it's just awesome. So, yeah, my shout out is to everybody this week because I'm so grateful for our listeners, for sure.
It was interesting. I was at the pool and I was swimming, and Patrick was in the lane next to me, and he said, "Are you recording today?" And I said, "Yeah, we're recording at JT." He goes, "What? Episode number 302?" And I said, "That's right."
Wow, somebody's definitely listening. Wow, that's great.
Oh, Patrick, thank you.
Oh, Patrick. I know where you're getting the "Oh, Patrick" from. That's funny.
Let's do a little shout out to Hammer Nutrition and their Chain Breaker Coffee. And folks, if you would like some Chain Breaker Coffee, there's a link on my website in the show notes for today's podcast, and it's hammernutrition.com/BOB71470, and you get the family and friends discount of saving 15% on your first order and enjoy a 25% in free product credits. So there you go. Now, you can't beat that at Hammer Nutrition.
No, and the coffee is great. I mean, it really is. This morning I'm cheating just because I went to the gym and I got the boys Dunkin' Donuts. So I have a Dunkin' Donuts coffee next to me right now. But I know. I feel like I should be fired from the podcast or something. I don't know.
No.
But
no.
Man, I did have some before I went to the gym. I think that counts. Yeah.
And it really does,
All right.
yeah.
All right.
By the way, you went to Dunkin' Donuts. I hate to ask.
No, I
didn't.
Donut? No. I can't even believe you would insult me with that. Hey, I don't qualify for a donut anymore because I'm no longer an officer of the law. However, no, I really went out of my way to never eat donuts, especially when I was in uniform, because, I don't want to feed stereotypes. I would like to break them.
That's incorrect stigma on the officers of the law.
Well, the truth was the only places that were open really early and really late were usually donut shops, especially Dunkin' Donuts, because a lot of them are 24 hours. So if you want, and, a lot of them used to give out free coffee because they wanted police officers there in the middle of the night because it kept people from, being tempted to rob them or do whatever. So that's what started the whole thing. It wasn't that cops liked donuts. It was that cops were always at donut shops because they were open 24 hours a day. So, and they got free coffee out of it. So anyway,
there you go.
Yeah. But now, it's considered not cool at all for us to take anything for free. So, interesting. This is a total side note, but one of the owners of a Dunkin' Donuts actually went into the police chief and let him have it for not allowing officers to take free coffee. He said, all you've done is make it to where the officers don't come to my shop, and my officers aren't, or your officers aren't there all the time, and my employees don't feel as protected. You literally, by saying they can't take free coffee, you've made it to where it's more dangerous for my employees to work all night. And he let them have it. So, there's always, citizens always would jump on, oh man, why do you get free stuff? It's like, well, it's because the business owner wants to give it because they want us there, which, for about 8 years after the social justice thing, it seemed like nobody wanted us anywhere, except for the Dunkin' Donuts guy.
Yeah, just see how people feel about that, right? Yeah. So, well, today, JT, we're talking about, are you guarding your heart? What does that title bring to your mind?
It's so relevant, as always, to, we were talking about my day yesterday. It was just one of those days where literally everything I touched just went drastically wrong. Like, it got to the point to where I just wanted to sit inside my house and put a protective bubble around it. So I no longer had to worry about messing something up or something going wrong as I touched it. But what I was doing was I was allowing all of my outside circumstances to dictate my inside circumstances.
Yeah.
And the truth is, we're supposed to guard our heart from the outside circumstances, from the outside world, from those bad influences, from the things that the world would tell us to allow in, like becoming obsessed about material things, looking at porn, being obsessed with things that are just unhealthy for you, smoking, drinking, gambling, all those things that the world just kind of pushes on you. We're supposed to protect our heart from those things. And the reason why is because it allows us to continue to have the right perspective on the world if we don't allow the world to determine our perspective. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It makes big sense, yeah.
Yeah. But that's what comes to my mind. How about you, buddy?
Well, that's where we're going today, that our hearts are constantly under attack by the world, our own flesh, and, of course, the devil. And if you don't believe me, go back and dissect the last time you spilled out words that you wish you had never said and what happened before that. Bottom line is, Jesus says, what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander. So we need to really guard our hearts, because our hearts really dictate how we respond to things in life. And that's where we're going today. Are you guarding your heart?
Yeah, so good. But before we turn to your blog, I want folks to turn to BobBrubaker.com. Man, yeah, just fumbled over that one. Let's do it again. I would encourage everybody to go over to BobBrubaker.com. I would encourage everybody to check out all of the resources that are found there. But at the very least, show up for the blog. It'll show up every Monday. It'll come to your email free of charge, and it'll get you started for a great week. But let's turn to your blog titled, Are You Guarding Your Heart?
Well, I wrote in the blog that the heart is the seat of affections and really the focal point of all spiritual change. In fact, Jesus said you can tell what's in the heart by what you see coming out of the person's mouth, and an indication of what is really in the heart. In Luke chapter 12, he says, for where your treasure is, there is where your heart will be also. Therefore, it is imperative to take good care of your heart, guard your heart, or keep your heart from falling prey to the world, the flesh, and the devil. For all the temptations are seeking to gain control of your heart. Proverbs chapter 4 says, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Well, this is so important that God gave instruction to keep your soul or your heart, lest you slip into forgetting what God has done for you. Then even adds the importance of doing so, because the way that you keep your heart will influence your children and your grandchildren, which is easy to see how that would happen, because when one generation lets things of God just slip away, they drift and their children follow the trend, and sadly, so do their children. And the trend can stop as it stops with you, and that is the gist of the word that God spoke to in the book of Deuteronomy. He says, take care, keep your soul or your heart diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, lest they depart from your heart on the days of your life. Make them known to your children and to your children's children. It's wonderful to see how God steps in and gives us great principles for living that have a positive influence on our hearts. Case in point, worry. When we're filled with worry, we're living like an atheist, and if we continue to do that, our heart will be overcome with negativity, which will drive us farther and farther away from God and His Word, and instead, worrying, then God commands us to pray. Now look what he promises. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Notice the peace of God will guard your hearts and your minds. How good is that? We are not without responsibility in this, because if we follow the Scripture points out that we need to be on guard to keep ourselves from idols. We also need to check off the fact that problems, since you do not have graven images around, we don't think, well, it's not a problem for me of idols. But anything can be becoming an idol, like your children or your stuff, or even to become your idols, this place of source of joy instead of the Lord himself. On a positive note, God gives us several places in the book of Proverbs that are important aspects of keeping your hearts in check. He says in Proverbs 2, "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding," you're guarding your heart, applying your heart to instruction and your ear to the words of knowledge. Or he says, "Let steadfast love and faithfulness not forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the table of your heart, so you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man." Well, bottom line is, JT, our hearts are under attack all the time, and that's why we need to guard our hearts.
Yeah, I have thought so much about those three different areas where the attacks come from. And a lot of us always forget that the attack can come from our own heart because we didn't protect it, right? Satan is the obvious one. The world maybe isn't so obvious for a lot of people, but the one that a lot of people just forget is that our heart, I remember talking to Pastor Chris down at Skycrest Community Church, and I remember him saying how many times people would make the mistake of believing their heart when it came to infidelity.
Oh, yeah.
And they would say,
and that's why it says in the book of Jeremiah that it says the heart is deceitful above all things. So,
yep. Who can trust it, right?
That's right.
So a lot of times, if we forget that our own heart can be deceitful, we can find ourselves in a bad situation, because we start to look at things that are going on around us that our heart desires, and we start to think it's coming from God when in fact it isn't, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one that I think is really important for all of us to pay attention to. The world is kind of a gimme. I mean, look at the advertisements that get blasted at you when you're watching anything on YouTube or any of the other apps that we have downloaded on our TVs. These commercials are all about how bad your life is without their product and how much better it can be with it. And man, what a crock of crap that you can think that anything that you purchase is going to buy you happiness. That's the most false message that's ever been sent by Satan. And
well, that advertising scheme has been out there since the beginning of advertising, really.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of times, we fall for it with our bikes. We fall for it with, for you and I, it's like, oh, well, if I have a really light bike, it's going to make all the difference in the world. And then when you start to ride that really light bike, you start to realize, well, maybe if I just lost some weight, it wouldn't have mattered how light my bike was. Right? So I don't know. It's kind of funny. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on that, man. It's really important for you to guard your heart, because, man, the world can just send you in really bad directions, and you find yourself looking back saying, how did I get here? As far as feeling like anxious, lonely, feeling like you're not good enough, feeling like the things in your life aren't good enough. Those are all the false messages that you allowed to get into your heart. That's what the bottom line is.
Well, check it out. The article is called "Are You Guarding Your Heart?" It's the Power Break blog found at bobbrubaker.com. Check it out this week.
So what else is happening, Bob? Anything you want the listeners to know about this week?
Then it might be appropriate to add the book Running to Win. It's just some winning principles of life that I put together, and it's found at bobbrubaker.com. The book is called Running to Win. Check it out at bobbrubaker.com. Click on the resources, go to the books, and the books, you'll find it. Running to Win actually has my picture crossing the finish line at Ironman Lake Placid, I believe it was.
Wow, that's cool. Wasn't that the one that had really bad weather, like for the actual swim? Like there was issues.
No, that was Ironman Utah. That did that.
Utah. Okay.
But Ironman Lake Placid, that was a beautiful place to ride and swim and run. But of course, as you left town, there was the bike loop was two laps of 56 miles each. Okay.
Wow.
And when you left town, you climbed a mountain.
Wow.
You knew you were getting up there close because it said ski jump area to the right.
Yeah, that's a mountain, all right. Yeah. Ugh.
That was one of 4 mountain climbs on each loop. It was a lot of climbing that day.
That's brutal. Brutal.
Yeah, it was. It was pretty brutal, and it was one of those times the swim was pretty nice, and then you had to run through town for 3 city blocks to get to the transition area. It was weird, really weird, but nevertheless,
wow.
That was Ironman Lake Placid, New York. Anyway. Also talking about the Running to Win, but also the sermon links to the sermons I preach here at Christ Community Presbyterian Church in Clearwater, Florida. Through the summer, I go through the book of Psalms. We start with Psalm 100 and then end with Psalm 110 this summer. And good stuff as you always look at all the things that the book of Psalms has and just stop and think about it. The majority of Psalms are written by David, and most of those Psalms written by David were the times that things were not too pleasant in his life, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's right.
But he has reason after reason after reason to praise and worship God. So check it out, the sermon links and the books and more at bobbrubaker.com.
This is the Power Break Podcast. I'm JT along with Bob Brubaker, and this is time on the podcast for questions and answers. If you have a question for me or for Bob, feel free to email me at bobbrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering those at, email me at jt@bobbrubaker.com. That would probably be better. And we'll get to answering your questions on an upcoming Power Break podcast. All right, question number 1 from the spiritual side of life. You brought up the need to keep ourselves from idols. What do you mean by that? Because a lot of people get that whole idol thing confused.
Well, I think it's important to realize what John says in 1 John chapter 5, verse 21, little children, keep yourselves from idols. In other words, idols are going to take a real precedent on your heart, so watch out for them. And as we mentioned earlier from Jeremiah 17, it says, the heart is deceitful above all things, desperately sick. Who can understand it? And the next verse says, I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his deeds. So in Exodus, he says, make sure in the 10 Commandments, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything in heaven or that is in the earth or beneath the earth and the water that's under the earth. So the fact is, we think we're safe because we don't have little idols sitting around, little objects sitting around that we worship. The point is, a lot of things come up in our lives that become an idol. As you mentioned, our bicycles or our working out can become an idol. Anything that robs us of total focus upon God as God alone, and anything that we find joy in or find rest in other than God, anything that takes the place of God in our lives is an idol.
Right.
And John Calvin made the statement that everybody quotes all the time. He says the mind is a factory of idols. In other words, we just keep making one up.
That's right.
One after another. So that's why when Jesus was asked the greatest commandment, he says that here, this is the greatest commandment, in which he quoted, he says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. And he says the second is like unto it, and love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. And that's really the summation of the 10 Commandments in those two verses.
Yeah, I don't think it becomes a conscious thing for us that something as little as a hobby that you're doing can become an idol. And it's when it becomes the thing that you find peace in, as opposed to going to God and finding peace in it. So, I would encourage everybody to be honest with themselves about that, because I can honestly tell you that there's a lot of times where the first thing that pops in my mind if things are going bad is, man, I'm just going to go for a bike ride, be out in the middle of nowhere, instead of saying, you know something, I got to recenter. I'm going to read some scripture. I'm going to pray. I'm going to find that comfort in Him. And it's hard to be honest with yourself, because all those little things that can become idols are certainly things that we enjoy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we enjoy and that we find comfort in that. We find comfort. Just like sometimes people just said, if I just can just sit down and watch television for an hour, I'll feel a whole lot better.
Yeah. Right.
Well, it's not the television that's wrong. It's the fact that now you're saying that that's where I have to turn to that to find my rest.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay?
That's right. That is the issue. And it's really hard to discern that, because I know some people who feel guilty about how much, they work out. Like, say you're just a gym person, you really find enjoyment in it. Enjoyment isn't the bad thing. It's the finding comfort in it that's the bad thing over God, right? Yeah.
And that can be anything to take that place.
Yeah, for sure. So that brings us into the mental side. So what is an appropriate mental strategy when it comes to guarding our hearts?
Well, first of all, to realize the importance of it, since the Scriptures give us many examples and calls us to guard our hearts. Again, from Proverbs, my son, if you receive my words, treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding. It's saying, okay, I need help. So that's the important thing, to realize that we need help in guarding our hearts. And sometimes it's like, JT, it's like when you go to the gym, that if you're just struggling through your workouts, it's maybe good to have a coach, someone from the outside to help you.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is where we find somebody, a mentor in our lives, to help us to guard our hearts and run by them the activities that we do and say, I just wonder if this has become an idol in my life that takes away my heart from being totally focused on God.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great point. Sometimes an outsider's perspective is really the thing that you need, which brings us back to the Christian community side of it. It's another reason why being involved in a church, being involved in a life group, being involved with other Christians is so important, because they understand this aspect. Because your average person, if you sit down and you talk to them about, man, you've made working out an idol. You've put it above everything else. That's the thing that really is the place that you go to find comfort. And it really is affecting your life. If they're not a Christian, they don't realize the part about how that can be a dangerous thing. They would think, oh, well, at least I'm not doing something destructive. Like it's, I'm not going to a strip club or anything, right? They're looking at it from the perspective of, this is a healthy addiction that I have. But Scripture says even the healthy ones can distract you from your heart, or distract you from being healthy, from guarding your heart against these things. So, it's just such an important part of a Christian's walk to have the accountability of somebody else, like you said, a coach or a mentor of some kind, or other people in your life group. It's really a great point.
It's interesting how Paul put it. He said, I keep under my body to keep it under control, lest after I preach to others, I myself would be a castaway. In other words, I realize I need the help of others in my life all the time, and to keep me straight on this. And so I keep under myself. So it's not wrong to have the self-discipline, but it is wrong if that self-discipline becomes an idol to itself and takes us away from God rather than serving God.
Yeah. And it's so easy to get distracted. Good stuff, man. All right. So for question number 3, we're going to turn to the physical side of life as always. And my question is, so roughly how much time is needed to train for an endurance event, Bob? If you're doing some kind of long endurance event.
Yeah, I get asked this a lot since I did a number of marathons and Ironman triathlons. So to go from zero to event, I've heard a month of training for every mile of racing. Again, going from couch to marathon would be 26 months. If you have a good base already, then it would be basically cut in half. Okay, so for cycling events, zero to event would be a month for every 10 miles. So to train for a century ride from couch to even a century would be about 10 months. Again, for a person with a good base, that would be less. So what do you think, JT? You've done a bunch of things.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You need to be honest with yourself about where you're at when you start the training. Like my boys, they went to the gym with me today, and we did a leg workout. And I kept telling them, don't use a lot of weight. This is about, you're just getting started. This is about form. This is about making sure that you don't develop bad habits with your form, making sure you don't hurt yourself. Well, because they're kids, they're not super honest with themselves in their head. So they're trying to compete with each other. They're trying to compete with dad. And I'm like, dude, you're not going to, I've been lifting my whole life. You're not going to be able to lift more than me coming into the gym, right? It's just not going to happen based on your age and your experience. They weren't honest with themselves. And I promise you tomorrow, Bob, they're going to know that they weren't honest with themselves because they went a little bit too hard. And tomorrow's going to be bad. The day after is going to be worse. And then it'll start to get better again. And then the next time we go to the gym, I bet you they'll be a little bit better to themselves as far as. But be honest with yourself when you start. That's really important. And work your way up slowly. I remember reading something about the way that your body adapts to working out. The first thing that actually adapts is your bones. And then your muscles adapt. But the last thing is your ligaments. So that's why a lot of people who push themselves into trying to get in shape too quick, they end up with a lot of sore joints. And the reason why is because their ligaments, they don't adapt as fast as the muscles and the bones. So what will happen is if you go too fast, the muscle becomes too strong for the ligament, and then you have joint pain. You have issues. And you most certainly will end up with injuries if you keep pushing it, right? So, yeah, it's important to know how your body's going to adapt. And if you're starting from zero, Bob, you just got to know that, okay, I got to take my time because I don't want to hurt myself.
Yeah, you always find people that decide they're going to run, and they decide they're going to run like a 10K, and they go out and just take off, and they run about 2 or 3 miles, and they run at a really, really fast pace.
Yeah.
And this is not fun, and so they go home and say, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah, it's horrible.
The whole point is they have not disciplined themselves to prepare adequately, and that's what our whole point is. Whatever you're doing, notice where you are, having a correct assessment of where you are, and then a realistic assessment is how long it's going to take to get to where you are. You may be wanting to pick up running so you can run a 10K at the end of the summer. That's probably too soon if you're not doing anything at the right moment.
Yeah.
So anyway, it takes discipline to adequately train for events, which means you are less apt to injure yourself, which is very, very important. And as we point out each week, discipline does make the difference in all aspects of life. Check out today's show notes at BobBrubaker.com and click on the Power Break podcast. Today is show number 302.
And submit your questions by email to jt@BobBrubaker.com and listen for our answer on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
Quick word for running to win, some principles about winning in life that's very applicable from the athletic world, so check it out. Running to win at BobBrubaker.com.
Well, thank you for joining us for the Power Break podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review wherever you've downloaded the podcast, and check out show notes, news, Bob's weekly blog, and other cool things at BobBrubaker.com. And listen next week for the Power Break podcast.